The first time I saw the satellite images, I felt something shift inside me. A primal reaction, a sense of wrongness that I couldn't put into words. The heat bloom beneath the Antarctic ice was impossible, a flare of warmth in a place that had been frozen for millions of years. It pulsed, almost as if something alive were stirring beneath the surface. Wayland's people found me 2 days later. They didn't knock. They didn't announce themselves. A man in a black coat and mirrored sunglasses stood at my doorstep, silent and waiting. When I opened the door, he held out a sleek black folder. No words, no pleasantries, just a silent offering. Inside were the images, detailed thermal scans of something buried 2,000 feet beneath the ice off the coast of Bovatoya, an island so remote it was little more than a dot on the map. I knew about Wayland Industries, of course. Everyone did. The man himself, Charles Wayland, was a specter of industry, a billionaire with a dwindling lifespan and an insatiable hunger for legacy. "This isn't just ice," I murmured, running a finger over the sharp edges of the scans. "No," the man agreed. His voice was flat, emotionless. "It's something much older." And that was all it took. I boarded the Wayland jet 3 hours later. The team was already assembled when I arrived at the Wayland facility in Chile. A mix of hardened professionals and wide-eyed academics. Each one carefully chosen, though none of us knew exactly why. I recognized a few faces from research papers and news articles. Dr. Sebastian de Rosa, the archaeologist, John Woods, the mountaineering expert, and Richard, a security specialist who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Wayland himself sat at the head of the long conference table, his presence commanding despite the thinness of his frame. He was dying, anyone with eyes could see that, but there was something in the way he held himself, an iron determination that made sickness seem like an inconvenience rather than a death sentence. He gestured to the holographic projection at the center of the table. It was a rotating 3D model of a buried structure, unmistakably artificial, its design eerily reminiscent of ancient civilizations, but wrong, distorted. "A pyramid," De Rosa breathed. His fingers twitched as if itching to reach out and touch the image. "A temple," Wayland corrected. His voice was smooth, deliberate. "Older than the ice that covers it. Older than human history." A murmur rippled through the room. Wayland turned his sharp gaze toward me. "You specialize in deciphering ancient languages, do you not?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. Then you'll be crucial to this mission. The structure is covered in symbols. Undocumented, unreadable. We need to understand them." I frowned. "And if they weren't meant to be understood?" His smile was thin. "Then we're about to find out why." We reached Bovatoya in darkness. The helicopter's rotor blades cut through the silence like a heartbeat, rhythmic and steady. But beneath that sound was something else, a whispering. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the more I listened, the more it sounded like something speaking, just on the edge of comprehension. The abandoned whaling station loomed ahead, barely visible in the snow-blown night. The structures were skeletal, their wooden beams blackened with time. The place had been deserted for nearly a century, but it felt wrong. Not ruined, not decayed, but left behind, untouched, waiting. John Woods led the way, her movements sharp and efficient. I watched as she paused near the center of the station, shining her flashlight down at the ground. "Something's been here," she murmured. I stepped closer and felt my stomach tighten. The snow had been melted away, revealing a gaping hole in the ice, its edges smooth and perfect, as if something had burned through it with inhuman precision. Richard swore under his breath. "Tell me we brought enough firepower for this." Wayland didn't answer. He simply stepped forward and looked down into the abyss. "Let's begin." The descent was suffocating. The tunnel stretched downward at an impossible angle, as if something had carved its way through the ice in a single, clean motion. The deeper we went, the more unnatural it felt. The walls were smooth, almost polished, reflecting our flashlight beams in ways that made them seem to twist and shift. I pressed my gloved hand to the surface and recoiled. It was warm. No one spoke. The silence pressed in around us, thick and heavy. A pressure at the base of the skull, an instinct screaming that we shouldn't be here. When we finally reached the bottom, the sight that greeted us made my breath catch in my throat. The pyramid was impossibly large. Its structure loomed before us, too perfect, too symmetrical, the dark stones seemingly untouched by time. Symbols, alien, intricate, covered its surface, twisting in ways that made my eyes ache. They weren't just carved. They pulsed. I glanced at DeRosa. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Do you recognize any of it?" I whispered. He shook his head. "No, and that scares me." Richard and the other mercenaries spread out, weapons raised. "Something's not right," one of them muttered. I turned in time to see him kneel beside a human skull, half buried in the ice. That was when the structure groaned. It was a deep, resonant sound that came from inside the stone itself. The ground trembled beneath us. The symbols on the walls flared, pulsing in rhythm with the noise. Something shifted in the darkness. Then the entrance sealed shut behind us. We weren't alone. I knew at the moment the lights flickered. There was movement in the shadows, a presence just beyond the reach of our vision. At first it was subtle, a whisper of fabric, a flicker of motion. But then came the voices. Low, guttural clicks, like something trying to mimic human speech, but failing. Richard raised his weapon. "Who's there?" The air changed. The cold, lifeless atmosphere became dense, pressing, alive. I turned slowly. Something was standing at the edge of the chamber. Tall, inhuman. Its armor was dark and intricate, a fusion of bone and metal, its mask featureless except for the slits of its glowing eyes. It was watching us. Then it moved. The last thing I saw before the world erupted into chaos was the shimmer of a second figure stepping into view. Then a third, and then the screaming began. Darkness moved like a living thing. It pooled in the spaces between shadows, clung to the walls, and wrapped around the ancient stone like something breathing, watching. The air had changed, thicker now, heavy with an odor I couldn't quite place. Something sharp, metallic, blood and ozone. The first shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed chamber. Richard fired blindly into the darkness, the muzzle flash illuminating something massive, something that wasn't supposed to exist. Then came the roar. It wasn't human. It was an animal. It was something else, a frequency too deep to belong to a living thing, but too organic to be mechanical. A sound that came from within the stone walls, as if the very structure around us was alive. The mercenaries responded in kind, gunfire lighting up the chamber in violent bursts. The flashes painted fleeting images across my vision. A towering figure of armor and shadow, cold eyes burning through the mask of its helmet. The sheer size of it was staggering. The way it moved unnatural, fluid and deliberate, a predator without wasted motion. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. Silence stretched thick and strangling. Richard was breathing hard, his grip white-knuckled around his weapon. Did we? Something grabbed him. It moved faster than my eyes could follow. One moment he was there. The next he was gone, dragged screaming into the abyss, his voice swallowed by the labyrinthine corridors beyond. I caught a glimpse of something sharp, a flash of razor-edged steel, before he vanished completely. The remaining mercenaries backed into a defensive formation, their weapons trained on the darkness, but the fear had already set in. They weren't trained for this. None of us were. Mex was the first to regain control. We need to move. Now! I forced my legs to obey, following her as we pushed deeper into the pyramid. My mind was scrambling for logic, for explanation. Predators, hunters, beings who had been here long before us, watching, waiting, and we had just woken them up. The corridors twisted in unnatural ways, the walls pulsing, rearranging themselves when we weren't looking. My sense of direction failed almost instantly. The space refused to behave as it should. What should have been a straight path suddenly looped back onto itself. Doorways shifted position. We were rats in a shifting maze, our every step dictated by something unseen. Sebastian was muttering under his breath, running his fingers over the symbols carved into the walls. They were shifting, changing, rewriting themselves as he looked at them. His face had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the freezing air. "This isn't right," he whispered. "It's not just a structure. It's responding to us." Mex turned sharply. "What the hell does that mean?" He didn't answer. Or maybe he couldn't. His eyes darted back and forth, scanning the endless sea of glyphs. Then he froze. "Dear God," he breathed. I followed his gaze. A mural stretched across the chamber wall, illuminated by the pale glow of our flashlights. It depicted something horrific, not just sacrifice, but a ritual. Humans, bound and screaming, lined up before towering figures. The predators. But it was the next image that made my stomach drop. The humans were on their knees, their chests split open, and something was crawling out. I staggered back while rising in my throat. "What the hell is this?" Sebastian exhaled, his voice barely a whisper. "A breeding ground." Mex shook her head. No, that can't be." Then we heard it, a skittering sound from deeper within the pyramid. Wet, unnatural, hungry. Mex lifted her weapon. "Move! Now!" We ran. The corridors blurred past us. I could barely keep up, my breath burning in my lungs. The architecture was wrong. Angles that shouldn't exist, spaces that stretched and shrank at will. The walls seemed to hum with something ancient, something waking up. The passage opened into a massive chamber, and we stumbled to a halt. It was a sacrificial room. The floor was littered with bones. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They were human, some old, some recent. The stench of rot clung to the air, thick enough to choke. And at the center of the room, something shifted. A low hiss filled the silence. I turned slowly, my body locking up as my flashlight illuminated a mass of pulsating, organic shapes, slick with moisture. Eggs. Dozens of them. Sebastian grabbed my arm. "We need to..." Something burst from the nearest egg. It moved too fast for me to process. A blur of motion, legs skittering across the ground. Then the screaming started. One of the mercenaries went down, clutching at his face, his body spasming violently. The thing was latched to him, a nightmare of limbs and flesh, a parasite designed with cruel efficiency. I stumbled back, barely registering the gunfire, the chaos. Mex grabbed me by the shoulder. "Run!" I didn't argue. We sprinted through the corridors, the walls sealing shut behind us, closing off the sacrificial chamber like a mouth snapping shut. The maze was reconfiguring, forcing us forward. The ground rumbled. A deep, throaty sound reverberated through the stone. Not the roar of a predator. Something bigger. The passage widened into a final chamber. And that's when we saw it. She was waking up. The queen. She loomed at the far end of the chamber, her carapace slick and glistening, her eyes reflecting the flickering light. The sheer size of her was incomprehensible, a thing of primal hunger, a god of destruction, waiting for the cycle to begin again. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This wasn't just a hunting ground. It wasn't just a ritual. It was a prison, and we had just opened the door. A sound cut through the thick silence, a clicking, rhythmic, and deliberate. We turned. The predator stood at the threshold of the chamber, its glowing eyes locked onto us. It didn't raise its weapon. It didn't move to attack. It simply watched. Then slowly it tilted its head. The realization hit me like a physical blow. We weren't just prey. We were part of the game. The air inside the chamber was thick, almost gelatinous, pressing against my skin like something alive. My breath felt heavy in my chest. Each inhale tainted with the cloying scent of decay, ammonia, and something metallic, something ancient. The queen hadn't moved, but I could feel her watching us, those dark, lidless eyes reflecting the dim light of our flickering headlamps. Mex's grip tightened around the weapon in her hands. "We need to get out of here." No one argued. Sebastian was shaking, his gaze darting between the massive, pulsating creature and the predator standing motionless in the doorway. The mercenaries had already been reduced to bloodstains and echoes. Only the three of us remained. I wanted to run. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn, to flee, to put as much distance between myself and whatever this was. But I couldn't. I was frozen, caught between the horror behind me and the predator ahead. Then the queen stirred. The sound she made wasn't a roar. It was deeper, wetter, a low, reverberating growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I felt it in my bones before I heard it in my ears. The chamber trembled. A shudder passed through the stone beneath our feet. And then came the skittering. It began in the distant corridors, a chittering, scraping cacophony, too many legs moving too fast, an unholy rhythm that sent my pulse into overdrive. Mex acted first. She lunged toward the predator. I expected an attack, but it didn't raise its weapon. It simply watched her. Its glowing eyes flicked to me, then to Sebastian, then to the chamber itself. The predator wasn't hunting us. It was trapping the real prey. Mex hesitated, then made a choice. With a sharp motion, she unhooked the plasma weapon she had taken from the body of another fallen predator and tossed it toward the creature before us. The predator caught it midair. A calculated movement, efficient, measured. Then in one fluid motion it turned and fired. The blast hit the queen square in the thick, bony plate of her head. The sound that followed was a scream, so loud it fractured reality. Stone cracked. The pyramid itself seemed to react, the symbols along the walls blazing with light. The queen lurched forward, her tail whipping violently, cleaving through the space where Mex had stood just moments before. "Move!" Mex shouted. The chase began. We ran deeper into the labyrinth, deeper into the horror. The corridors shifted beneath our feet, twisting, reconfiguring, bending space in ways that should not have been possible. The pyramid was alive. It wasn't just a hunting ground. It wasn't just a prison. It was a machine, and we were running straight into its heart. The tunnels stretched endlessly, narrowing, expanding, turning back on themselves in unnatural geometries. Mex led the way, her breathing sharp, controlled. Sebastian was lagging, stumbling as he tried to keep pace. The predator was with us, moving in eerie silence, its form barely more than a shadow flickering in and out of the dim emergency lighting. Then ahead, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. It was wrong. The floor was not stone, but something else. Something black and slick, shifting with a slow, undulating pulse. The walls weren't carved but grown, smooth and wet, pulsing with veins of sickly green light. This was deeper than any human had ever gone. I felt something behind my eyes, a pressure, a whisper of something I didn't understand. My thoughts didn't feel like my own. Then I heard them, not voices, not in the traditional sense. Something older, deeper, a presence that had existed long before mankind had taken its first breath. Sebastian gasped beside me. This isn't just a pyramid. Mex swallowed. No, it's not. The predator stepped forward, scanning the room, its mask tilting slightly as it examined the space. It knew this place. It had been here before. Then the floor shifted, not trembled, not cracked. It moved. A deep, mechanical groan filled the air, and suddenly the chamber descended. The ground beneath us dropped in a controlled, mechanical motion, as if we were standing on an elevator crafted by the hands of something not human. The walls blurred as we were pulled down, deeper than we should have been able to go. I looked up. The queen was following. She had given chase, tearing through the corridors, her massive form barely squeezing through the confines of the shifting tunnels. Her Xenomorph's offspring moved ahead of her, crawling along the walls, the ceiling, surrounding us from all sides. We had nowhere to run. Then the descent stopped. The floor opened, and we fell. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. The chamber we landed in was vast, stretching into a darkness, so complete it seemed to swallow light itself. The walls were different here, not stone, not metal, but something else entirely. Something ancient. Sebastian groaned beside me, struggling to his feet. Mex was already up, scanning the darkness, weapon raised. The predator had landed in a crouch, unmoving. Then, the symbols began to glow. Not just the ones on the walls. The ones beneath our skin. I gasped, clutching my arm as something burned beneath my flesh. A searing heat that pulsed with the same frequency as the walls around us. Sebastian ripped back his sleeve. His forearm was marked with a sigil that hadn't been there before, a twisting, shifting thing that moved even when he wasn't touching it. "We shouldn't be here," he whispered. The predator's mask retracted slightly, revealing a scarred, inhuman face. It reached out and pressed its hand to the wall. A door slid open. Mex tensed. "Should we go through?" Sebastian swallowed hard. "Do we have a choice?" The answer came from behind us. The queen had arrived. She stood at the edge of the chamber, her massive frame partially obscured by the darkness. The Xenomorphs surrounded her, their eyeless faces locked onto us, their tails twitching in anticipation. The predator turned, studying the queen, then it handed Mex a weapon. She hesitated. "What?" It let out a low, guttural sound. An offering. A pact. Not as prey, but as something else. The queen screeched, her massive form lunging forward. Mex took the weapon, and the war began. There was no hesitation. The predator had made its choice. Mex had made hers. The queen moved first, her massive frame lurching forward, the sheer weight of her body cracking the floor beneath her. The shriek she released was primordial, something that belonged to a time before human nightmares, something that cut through the flesh and into the bone of existence itself. Mex raised the weapon the predator had given her, a grotesque fusion of bone and metal, pulsing with unnatural energy, and fired. The blast hit the queen's outer carapace, sending a ripple of scorching heat through the air. The impact didn't stop her, but it slowed her, made her angrier. Sebastian stumbled backward, his breath ragged. "This isn't a fight we can win," he gasped. His fingers curled around the glowing sigil on his arm, tracing it absent-mindedly, as though he knew, as though something was whispering the truth into his skin. The predator leaped into the fray, spinning in mid-air, its wrist blades gleaming under the pale, sickly glow of the chamber. It landed on the queen's spiny crest, slashing, stabbing, its movements fluid and brutal, yet strategic. This wasn't a battle. It was a dance, a ritual. We were just actors in an ancient play, repeating the motions that had been set into motion long before our species had ever existed. The Xenomorphs swarmed from the walls, moving like a tide of blackened nightmares. They didn't just crawl. They unfolded from the shadows, shifting seamlessly from one surface to the next. Their eyeless heads turned toward us in perfect unison. Sebastian turned to me. "The way out." I didn't answer because I didn't know. And then the walls began to breathe. A pulse, slow at first, but deep, resonating through my ribs, through my mind. The room wasn't just a room. It was alive. The pyramid had woken up. The queen let out a deep, guttural hiss, turning her attention not toward us, not toward the predator, but toward the walls themselves. She recognized something. Mex staggered forward, gripping the weapon tighter. "What is this place?" Sebastian's voice was hoarse. "A tomb." The realization sank in like a knife in the gut. The pyramid had been shifting since we arrived, but it wasn't just to trap us. It was to keep something inside. The queen knew. She had always known. Her razor-sharp tail lashed out, impaling one of her own Xenomorphs, using its acid blood to melt a hole through the nearest wall. The predator saw what she was doing at the same time I did. It roared, charging forward, but it was too late. The wall gave way, and beneath it, the truth. We had never been the hunters. We had never even been the prey. We were just the warning. Beyond the crumbling wall, the chamber opened into something vast, something immeasurable. It wasn't just a cavern. It was an abyss, a hollowed-out void, stretching into a darkness that was not just the absence of light, but the absence of anything at all. Inside it, I saw the thing that had been waiting. Not a Xenomorphs, not a predator, not even something that fit into the categories of life that we understood. It was older, greater, a being that had been entombed here long before the pyramid was ever built, a being that had existed before the first stars burned in the void. The moment my eyes locked onto it, I felt it looking back, a whisper, curling into the deepest hollows of my mind. "You are nothing." It was not spoken in words. It was simply known. The queen screeched again, not in defiance, but in reverence. She had never been the apex predator. She had never even been the prisoner. She had been the key. The predator moved first, throwing a bladed disc directly toward her chest. The blade struck true, embedding itself deep into her thick armor. Acidic blood gushed from the wound, hissing as it burned through the stone floor. It didn't stop her. It only drove her forward. The queen threw herself into the abyss. For a second, everything was still. Then, the abyss moved. The world tilted. The pyramid began to collapse, folding in on itself like a dying animal curling inward to protect its wounds. Sebastian grabbed my arm. "We have to go." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Something inside me was breaking apart. Mex was already moving, sprinting toward the final exit, toward the narrowing tunnels that hadn't sealed yet. The predator turned toward me, those glowing eyes boring into mine. It saw something in me, something I didn't understand. Then, without hesitation, it lifted its wrist device, the one with the self-destruct mechanism. Lex's eyes widened. No, wait. The predator activated it. A final, echoing pulse spread through the chamber. The abyss screamed, and we ran. The detonation hit as we reached the surface. A deep, reverberating shockwave rolled through the ice, splintering it like glass, sending cracks racing across the frozen wasteland. I stumbled, falling onto my hands and knees, sucking in the frigid oxygen-thin air. Sebastian was beside me, coughing, shaking, his face pale. Mex stood a few feet away, staring back at the wreckage. The pyramid was gone, swallowed, and with it, the thing inside. The predator ship descended from the sky, silent, its shape blurring in and out of visibility as if it wasn't meant to exist in this world. The remaining predators stepped forward. One of them kneeled beside the fallen body of the warrior who had activated the bomb, the one who had made the final choice. It reached out, brushing its clawed hand over the predator's mask. A moment of respect. Then it turned to Lex. It tilted its head slightly, considering. A decision was made. It reached toward her and, with a slow, deliberate motion, marked her cheek with the acidic blood of a fallen Xenomorphs. Recognition. She was not prey. She was something else. I felt something stir beneath my own skin, the sigil still burning against my flesh. The predator's gaze flicked to me. It knew. It had always known. Mex turned to me, her breath still ragged. "It's over." I looked at the ruins of the pyramid, at the churning black void where the abyss had been. I wanted to believe her, but something inside me whispered that it wasn't. It would never be.